In the shadow of Buckingham Palace, where every smile is scrutinized and every gesture analyzed by millions, lies a story that has never been told. For over a decade, the world has watched William and Catherine present a picture-perfect royal marriage. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the palace doors close? A new biography has shattered the carefully constructed image, revealing intimate details that even the most dedicated royal watchers never imagined. From heated arguments that echoed through Kensington Palace corridors to tender moments shared away from prying eyes, this is the story of two people trying to build a genuine relationship while the entire world watches their every move. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the future king and queen. These aren't the sanitized stories fed to royal correspondents or the carefully staged photo opportunities. This is raw, unfiltered truth about love, duty, sacrifice, and the price of wearing a crown. Prepare to step behind the velvet curtains and marble pillars into a world where tradition clashes with modernity, where personal desires must bow to royal protocol, and where two young people discovered that fairy tales come with a cost nobody talks about. The spring rain drummed against the windows of St. Andrews University as Catherine Middleton hurried across the cobblestone courtyard, her dark hair whipping in the Scottish wind. She had no idea that the tall, blonde young man, watching her from his dormitory window, would one day place a sapphire ring on her finger and change her life forever. William Arthur Philip Lewis Windsor was trying desperately to be normal. After years of being followed by photographers and having his every move documented, the young prince had begged his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, for the chance to experience university life like any other student. What he got was something far more precious than anonymity. He got Catherine. Their first real conversation happened not in some grand ballroom or royal gathering, but in the university cafeteria over lukewarm shepherd's pie and bitter coffee. Catherine wasn't impressed by his title. In fact, she seemed almost annoyed when other students whispered about the prince sitting at her table. "Do you always eat lunch surrounded by whispers?" she asked, stirring her coffee with more force than necessary. William looked around at the other students, pretending not to stare. "Unfortunately, yes, though I was hoping university might be different." "Well, they're not whispering about me," Catherine replied with a slight smile. "So either learn to enjoy it or find somewhere else to sit." It was the first time in years someone had spoken to him without reverence, fear, or calculation. William was instantly intrigued. Their relationship began slowly, built on study sessions in the library and long walks along the Scottish coast. Catherine treated him like William the student, not William the future king. She challenged his opinions in their art history classes, beat him at tennis, and once famously told him his essay on Renaissance painting was thoroughly mediocre. But it was during their second year that everything changed. Catherine had agreed to participate in a charity fashion show, and when she walked down the runway in a sheer black dress over a bandeau top and black shorts, William's careful composure cracked. He leaned over to his friend Fergus and whispered words that would later become royal legend. "She's absolutely stunning." The biography reveals that William spent the rest of that evening working up the courage to ask Catherine out properly. Not for coffee between classes or group study sessions, but for a real date. He was terrified she would say no, not because of royal protocol, but because he genuinely cared what she thought of him. Their first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in town. William had chosen it specifically because it was dimly lit and tucked away from the main student areas. He arrived 30 minutes early, pacing outside until Catherine appeared in a simple blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. "You're nervous," she observed as they sat down. "Terrified," William admitted, abandoning the royal training that demanded he never show weakness. "Good," Catherine smiled. "That means this matters to you." What followed was 3 hours of conversation that flowed like wine. They talked about their families, their fears, their dreams for the future. William found himself describing the weight of expectation that had pressed down on him since childhood, while Catherine spoke about growing up as a middle-class girl who felt caught between worlds. Too posh for some, not posh enough for others. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you were just William Wales?" Catherine asked, using the surname he used at university. "Every single day," William replied. "But tonight I feel like I might be getting a glimpse of it." The biography reveals intimate details about their university years that paint a picture of two young people falling deeply in love while navigating the impossible circumstances of his birth. Catherine learned to spot the photographers who occasionally found their way to St. Andrews. William learned what it meant to have someone love him for who he was, not what he represented. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Catherine struggled with the attention that came with dating a prince. Photographers began following her to classes, and tabloid newspapers started digging into her family background. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, found their business and personal lives suddenly under intense scrutiny. "I never signed up for this," Catherine confided to her roommate during their third year. "I just wanted to date a boy I liked." But William was no ordinary boy, and their relationship was already changing both of them. Catherine began to understand the weight of royal duty, while William discovered what it meant to have a true partner. Their friends noticed how protective he became of her, often placing himself between Catherine and the curious stares of other students. The most revealing moment came during their final year, when Catherine seriously considered transferring to another university. The pressure of constant attention had become overwhelming, and she worried that her presence was making William's university experience more difficult than it needed to be. William's response was immediate and decisive. He drove through the night from London, where he had been attending a royal engagement, to arrive at Catherine's door at 6 in the morning. Still wearing his formal suit from the night before, he stood in the rain and delivered what the biography describes as the most important speech of his young life. "If you leave, you're not just leaving St. Andrews," he told her. "You're leaving me, and I can't promise you that this will get easier, but I can promise you that I want to face whatever comes next with you beside me." Catherine's decision to stay changed the course of royal history. But more than that, it revealed the depth of feeling between two people who had found something real in the most unlikely circumstances. Their graduation ceremony was bittersweet. They had created a bubble of normalcy that they both knew was about to burst. As they posed for photos with their families, the weight of the real world pressed down on them. William would return to his royal duties, while Catherine would have to decide what came next for a young woman in love with the future King of England. The biography captures their last night at St. Andrews with startling intimacy. They walked along the same coastal path where they had shared their first deep conversation, both knowing that everything was about to change. "Whatever happens next," William told her as they watched the sun rise over the North Sea, "these 4 years have been the best of my life." Catherine's response was equally heartfelt. "Then we'd better make sure the next part of our story is just as beautiful." Neither of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The years of separation, the intense media scrutiny, the pressure from palace officials who questioned whether a commoner could ever truly become queen. But in that moment, watching the Scottish sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, they had something that money couldn't buy and titles couldn't guarantee. They had each other. The foundation of their relationship, built on genuine affection and mutual respect, would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. But it was also strong enough to survive everything the royal world would throw at them. Their university love story was ending, but their real adventure was just beginning. The black Range Rover pulled away from St. Andrews for the final time, carrying William back to his royal duties and leaving Catherine standing in the car park with her suitcases and an uncertain future. The fairy tale romance of their university years was over, and the harsh reality of dating the future King of England was about to begin. Catherine moved back to her family home in Berkshire, a jarring transition from the independence of university life to living with her parents again at age 23. The media attention that had been manageable in the controlled environment of St. Andrews suddenly became overwhelming in the real world. Photographers camped outside her parents' house, followed her to the gym, and pursued her car through London streets. The woman who had once walked freely across university campuses now found herself trapped, unable to leave home without facing a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. "Where's William?" they would call out. "When are you getting engaged? What do your parents think about you dating a prince?" The biography reveals that Catherine spent many of those early months questioning whether she had made the right choice. The carefree young woman who had challenged William over coffee was slowly being suffocated by the weight of public expectation and media intrusion. Meanwhile, William was struggling with his own challenges. Thrust back into the formal world of royal duties, he found himself missing the normalcy Catherine had brought to his life. But palace advisors were already raising concerns about their relationship. Senior courtiers questioned whether Catherine came from the right background to eventually become queen. "She's lovely, sir, but is she ready for this life?" one particularly blunt advisor asked during a private meeting. "The scrutiny will only get worse, and the demands of royal duty are unlike anything she's experienced." William's response was defensive and immediate. "She's the strongest person I know. She can handle anything." But privately, he was beginning to wonder if that was true. Their phone conversations, once filled with laughter and easy conversation, became strained. Catherine seemed withdrawn, while William felt frustrated by his inability to protect her from the media storm. The first major crisis came 6 months after graduation. Catherine had finally found work as an accessories buyer for the clothing company Jigsaw, but photographers made her daily commute impossible. Pictures appeared in newspapers showing her looking stressed and tired, with cruel headlines questioning whether she was cut out for royal life. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Catherine stepped out of her flat to find 50 photographers waiting for her. The usually composed young woman who had handled university media attention with grace finally cracked. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible above the clicking cameras. "I just want to go to work." The photograph that appeared on newspaper front pages the next day showed Catherine with tears in her eyes, looking overwhelmed and vulnerable. It was an image that horrified both the public and the palace. William's reaction was swift and furious. He issued an unprecedented public statement through Clarence House, demanding that the media respect Catherine's privacy. But the damage was done. Catherine felt exposed and humiliated, while William felt powerless to protect the woman he loved. Their relationship entered its most difficult phase. William was committed to his military training with the Blues and Royals, while Catherine struggled to build a life under constant scrutiny. They saw each other less frequently, and when they did meet, the easy comfort of their university days seemed like a distant memory. The biography details intimate conversations during this period that revealed just how close they came to ending things. During one particularly difficult phone call, Catherine finally voiced what they had both been thinking. "Maybe this isn't going to work," she said quietly. "Maybe I'm not strong enough for this life." William's response was immediate. "Don't say that. You are the strongest person I know." "Then why do I feel like I'm drowning?" Catherine replied. The conversation ended in tears, with both of them questioning whether love was enough to overcome the seemingly impossible obstacles they faced. William hung up the phone and sat in his barracks room, staring at the wall and wondering if he was being selfish by asking someone to share his burden. Catherine, meanwhile, was having her own moment of crisis. She confided in her mother, Carol, about her doubts and fears. The conversation, as revealed in the biography, showed the strength of their family bond and the practical wisdom that would later make Catherine such an effective royal. "Do you love him?" Carol asked simply. "Yes," Catherine replied without hesitation. "And does he love you?" "I think so. I hope so." "Then the question isn't whether this is difficult," Carol said. "The question is whether you're willing to fight for something worth having." It was a turning point for Catherine. Instead of retreating further, she made a conscious decision to take control of her situation. She stopped avoiding photographers and started facing them with quiet dignity. She found ways to support William's career while building her own identity. Most importantly, she began to study royal protocol and history, preparing herself for a future she was no longer certain would happen, but was determined to be ready for if it did. William, observing these changes, fell in love with Catherine all over again. Her grace under pressure reminded him why he had been drawn to her in the first place. But the palace machinery continued to work against them, with senior advisors suggesting that William needed to play the field before settling down. The pressure reached a crescendo during William's birthday celebration in 2006. Catherine was not invited to the main party, a deliberate snub orchestrated by palace officials who wanted to send a clear message about her place in the royal hierarchy. William was furious, but he was also beginning to understand the impossible position Catherine was in. She was expected to act like a future queen while being treated like a temporary girlfriend. The contradiction was tearing their relationship apart. The biography reveals that they had a serious conversation about their future during a private weekend in Scotland. Away from the pressures of London and the watchful eyes of the media, they finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I can't keep doing this," Catherine said as they walked along a highland stream. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when I'm being torn apart in the newspapers every day." William stopped walking and turned to face her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need to know if this is going somewhere," Catherine replied. "Because if it isn't, I need to start building a different life." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. William had spent his entire life being told that duty came before personal happiness. But looking at Catherine, really looking at her, he realized that she had become part of his duty. Not to the crown, but to himself. "I can't promise you a timeline," he said finally. "But I can promise you that I'm not walking away from this. From us." Catherine studied his face, searching for certainty in a world that offered none. "Then we need to be smarter about how we do this. Because the way we've been handling things isn't working for either of us." They spent that weekend creating a strategy for their relationship that would protect them both while allowing their love to grow. It involved more private time, clearer boundaries with the media, and a conscious effort to build Catherine's public profile gradually rather than throwing her into the royal deep end. But even their best-laid plans couldn't prevent what was coming next. The pressures of royal life and the expectations of two families would soon push their relationship to the breaking point. The young couple who had found love in the halls of St. Andrews was about to face their greatest test yet. As they drove back to London that Sunday evening, neither William nor Catherine could have predicted that within months their fairy tale would come crashing down in the most public way possible. The woman who had stood by William through years of scrutiny and pressure was about to make a decision that would shock the royal family and captivate the world. Their story was far from over, but it was about to take a turn that neither of them saw coming. The foundation they had built together was strong, but it was about to be tested in ways that would either destroy their love forever or forge it into something unbreakable. The phone call that would change everything came on a grey April morning in 2007. Catherine was sitting in her London flat reading the morning newspapers over coffee when her phone buzzed with William's name on the screen. She answered with the usual warmth, but something in his voice immediately told her this wasn't a normal conversation. "We need to talk," William said. His words clipped and formal in a way that reminded Catherine of his public speeches rather than their intimate conversations.
"Okay," Catherine replied slowly, setting down her coffee cup.
"What about?" There was a long pause, filled with the weight of everything they hadn't said to each other over the past months. "I think we need some space," William finally said. "Some time to figure out what we really want." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. After years of defending their relationship against critics, after enduring media scrutiny that had driven other royal girlfriends away, after restructuring her entire life around loving the future King of England, William was asking for space. "Space," Catherine repeated, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "What kind of space?" "I don't know," William admitted, and for the first time in the conversation, he sounded like the young man she had fallen in love with rather than the prince giving a prepared statement. "I just know that I'm confused about everything, and I think you are too." The biography reveals that this conversation lasted over an hour, with both William and Catherine struggling to articulate feelings that seemed too big and complicated for words. William felt overwhelmed by the pressure to propose when he wasn't sure he was ready for marriage. Catherine felt exhausted by years of living in limbo, never knowing whether she was building a future or wasting her time. "Maybe the palace advisors are right," William said at one point. "Maybe we're too young for this. Maybe we need to experience other things before we can know if this is really what we want." Catherine's response was quiet but firm. "I already know what I want, William. The question is whether you do." When the call ended, Catherine sat in her flat, staring at the phone for a long time. The woman who had handled years of media pressure with grace and dignity finally allowed herself to fall apart. She called her sister Pippa, who rushed over to find Catherine crying in a way she hadn't seen since they were children. "He wants space," Catherine explained through her tears. "After everything we've been through, he wants to figure out what he wants." Pippa's response was characteristically direct. "Then give him all the space he can handle. And while he's figuring out what he wants, you figure out what you're worth." Meanwhile, William was having his own crisis at Clarence House. He had made the call he thought he needed to make, but instead of feeling relieved, he felt empty. His military colleagues noticed his distraction during training exercises. His brother Harry, despite their competitive relationship, could see that William was struggling. "You know you've just made the biggest mistake of your life, right?" Harry said during a rare moment of brotherly honesty. "I don't know anything anymore," William replied. "Everyone keeps telling me what I should do, what I should want, who I should be with. I just need to figure out what I actually want for myself." "And you couldn't figure that out with Catherine?" Harry asked. William didn't have an answer. The breakup, when it became public knowledge a few days later, dominated headlines around the world. "Wills dumps Kate," screamed the tabloids, while more respectable newspapers offered analysis about the pressure young royals faced in modern relationships. Everyone had an opinion about what had gone wrong and who was to blame. Catherine handled the media attention with a dignity that impressed even her critics. She continued her work, maintained her friendships, and refused to speak publicly about the breakup. But privately, she was devastated. The biography reveals journal entries from this period that show a young woman questioning everything she had believed about love and her own worth. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," she wrote. "Should I have been more understanding about the pressure he was under? Should I have been stronger when dealing with the media? Or should I have been honest earlier about what I needed from this relationship? The most painful part for Catherine wasn't the breakup itself, but the feeling that she had somehow failed a test she hadn't known she was taking. For years she had tried to prove herself worthy of royal life, only to be told that perhaps she had been trying too hard. William, meanwhile, was discovering that freedom didn't feel the way he had expected. Without Catherine's steadying presence, he found himself partying more and working less. Photographs appeared in newspapers showing him at London nightclubs with other women, images that delighted gossip columnists but worried his family. The biography details a particularly revealing conversation William had with his father, Prince Charles, during this period. Charles, who had his own complicated romantic history, offered advice that was both practical and personal. "The question isn't whether you can live without her," Charles told his son. "The question is whether you want to." "I don't know," William admitted. "Then you'd better figure it out," Charles replied. "Because while you're experimenting with freedom, you're losing the one person who loved you for who you are rather than what you represent." The turning point came 3 months after the breakup, at a mutual friend's party where both William and Catherine were guests. They had managed to avoid each other at social events up to that point, but this time there was no escape. Catherine arrived first, looking stunning in a simple black dress that emphasized everything William had lost. She was surrounded by friends and seemed genuinely happy, laughing and dancing with a lightness that had been missing during the final months of their relationship. When William arrived an hour later, the party atmosphere noticeably shifted. People watched to see how the former couple would interact, but Catherine gave him nothing more than a polite nod before returning to her conversation. It was exactly the reaction William hadn't expected. He had assumed Catherine would be upset or would try to talk to him. Instead, she seemed to have moved on completely. For the first time since the breakup, William realized that Catherine might not be waiting for him to figure out what he wanted. The biography describes William watching Catherine from across the room, seeing her as if for the first time. Without the weight of their relationship and its complications, he could see clearly what he had given up. Catherine was radiant, confident, and completely herself in a way that reminded him of the girl who had challenged him in university. "She's amazing," William's friend Fergus observed, following his gaze. "Yes," William replied quietly, "she is." But the most revealing moment came when Catherine prepared to leave the party. William watched as she said goodbye to their mutual friends, gracious and warm with everyone except him. As she reached the door, their eyes met for just a moment across the crowded room. Catherine's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that hit William like a punch to the chest. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was indifference. The woman who had once looked at him like he was her entire world was now looking at him like he was a stranger. William spent the rest of the party in a daze. He left early and drove through London for hours, trying to process what he had seen. Catherine wasn't pining for him or waiting for him to come to his senses. She was building a life without him, and she seemed to be doing just fine. The biography reveals that this was the night William finally understood what he had lost. Not just Catherine the girlfriend, but Catherine the partner, who had made him a better version of himself. The woman who had stood by him through the worst media attacks and the most demanding royal duties was now applying that same strength to getting over him. Over the following weeks, William found himself paying attention to Catherine in ways he hadn't during their relationship. He noticed how she handled difficult situations with grace, how she maintained her dignity under pressure, and how she had grown stronger rather than bitter after their breakup. Friends reported that William seemed distracted and regretful, but pride kept him from making the first move toward reconciliation. Catherine, meanwhile, was genuinely moving forward with her life, taking on new projects and rebuilding her confidence. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but fate intervened in the form of another social event where their paths crossed. This time, William wasn't content to watch from across the room. The biography describes him approaching Catherine with an unusual humility that surprised everyone who witnessed it. "Can we talk?" he asked simply. Catherine studied his face for a long moment before nodding toward a quieter corner of the room. What happened next would determine whether their love story was truly over or whether it was about to begin a new chapter. The prince who had asked for space was about to discover whether the woman he had let go was willing to give him a second chance. The conversation that would change the course of royal history happened in a corner of a crowded London club, with music thumping in the background and their friends pretending not to watch. William and Catherine stood facing each other for the first time in months, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a physical presence. "You look well," William said, immediately regretting the inadequate words. Catherine's smile was polite but distant. "Thank you. How are your studies going?" They were speaking like acquaintances, and the formality was killing William. This was the woman who had once fallen asleep on his shoulder during late-night study sessions, who had challenged his opinions and laughed at his jokes. Now she was treating him with the same careful courtesy she showed to strangers. "Catherine," William said, his voice dropping to a more intimate level, "I've been thinking about us, about everything that happened. Have you?" Catherine's tone remained neutral, but William caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. "I made a mistake," William said, the words coming out in a rush. "I thought I needed space to figure out what I wanted, but all I figured out was that I want you." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. When she finally spoke, her words were carefully measured. "You had space, William. What did you do with it?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. William thought about the months he had spent partying, trying to convince himself he was happy, telling friends he was finally free. The freedom had felt like drowning. "I wasted it," he admitted. "I spent so much time trying to prove to myself that I could be happy without you that I forgot to actually be happy." "And now you've decided you want me back?" Catherine asked. There was no anger in her voice, just a weariness that broke William's heart. "It's not that simple," William said, recognizing how his words sounded. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't have the right to ask for another chance. But I also know that losing you was the worst thing that's ever happened to me." The biography reveals that this conversation lasted over an hour, with both of them moving to a quieter location as the club grew more crowded. Catherine didn't make it easy for William. The months apart had given her clarity about what she would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. "I spent 3 years of my life loving you," Catherine said at one point. 3 years dealing with photographers, nasty headlines, and people questioning whether I was good enough for you. And when it got difficult, you decided you needed space to figure out if I was worth it." William winced at the accusation, but he couldn't deny its accuracy. "You're right. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for putting you through that, and I'm sorry for being too young and stupid to appreciate what we had." "Sorry doesn't fix the fact that you broke my heart," Catherine replied. "And it doesn't promise that you won't do it again when things get difficult." It was the opening William had been hoping for. Catherine was angry, but she was engaging with him. If she truly didn't care anymore, she would have walked away from the conversation. "You're right," William said. "I can't promise that I'll always handle things perfectly, but I can promise that I'll never walk away from us again. What we have is too important, too rare, to throw away because I'm scared of the responsibility." Catherine looked at him for a long time, searching his face for sincerity. "What's changed, William?" "What makes you think this will work now when it didn't work before?" "I've changed," William said simply. "I know what it feels like to live without you, and I never want to feel that way again." "And you've changed too. You're stronger now, more sure of yourself." "Maybe we're finally ready for this." The conversation didn't end with a dramatic reconciliation. Catherine told William she needed time to think, and they parted ways with nothing resolved. But something had shifted between them. A crack in the wall Catherine had built around her heart. Over the following weeks, William began a careful campaign to win Catherine back. The biography details the thoughtful gestures and private conversations that slowly rebuilt the trust between them. Unlike their university courtship, this wasn't about grand romantic gestures. This was about proving that he had learned from his mistakes. William sent Catherine a handwritten letter, something he had never done during their original relationship. In it, he acknowledged his failures and outlined his hopes for their future. The letter, excerpts of which appear in the biography, showed a level of emotional maturity that had been missing during their breakup. "I spent so long thinking about what everyone else expected of us that I forgot to pay attention to what we expected of each other," William wrote. "You deserve better than someone who was afraid of his own feelings, and I want the chance to be that better person."
Catherine kept the letter but didn't respond immediately.
Instead, she had lunch with her mother, Carol, who had watched her daughter's heartbreak with the helpless frustration of any parent. "What does your heart tell you?" Carol asked. "That I still love him," Catherine admitted. "But I don't know if love is enough anymore." "Love is never enough by itself," Carol replied. "But it's the foundation everything else is built on. The question is whether you think he's ready to build something real with you." Catherine's decision to give William another chance didn't come all at once. It was a gradual warming, a series of coffee dates and long phone conversations where they talked honestly about their fears and expectations. William had to prove that he was serious about their future, while Catherine had to decide whether she was willing to risk her heart again. The turning point came during a private weekend at Balmoral. the Queen's estate in Scotland. William had invited Catherine to join him for what he described as a proper conversation about our future. Away from London pressures and media attention, they finally had the space to rediscover each other. The biography describes long walks through Highland meadows where they talked about everything they had been too afraid to discuss before. William spoke honestly about the pressures of his position and his fears about marriage.
Catherine shared her own anxieties about whether she could handle the scrutiny that came with being his wife.
I need to know that you're with me because you want to be, Catherine said as they sat by a stream.
Not because you're supposed to be, or because it's expected, but because you choose me every day. I choose you, William said without hesitation. I choose you when it's easy and when it's hard. I choose you when the papers are kind and when they're cruel. I choose you because you make me better than I am, alone. It was the promise Catherine had needed to hear. Not a declaration of love, which they had never doubted, but a commitment to choice and effort, and daily decisions to put their relationship first. They returned to London as a couple, but this time their relationship was different. They had learned to communicate more honestly, to address problems before they became crises, and to protect their partnership from outside pressures. The biography reveals that they established new boundaries with the media and with palace officials, making it clear that their relationship was not open for public debate or manipulation. William also began the process of preparing Catherine for royal life in a more systematic way. Instead of throwing her into official events without preparation, he worked with palace staff to gradually introduce her to royal protocol and expectations. Catherine, for her part, embraced these lessons with the same determination she had shown in everything else. The most significant change was in how they handled the inevitable challenges. When photographers became too aggressive, they dealt with it together. When palace advisors questioned Catherine's background or readiness, William defended her immediately and decisively. When Catherine felt overwhelmed by public attention, William adjusted their schedules to give her more private time. Their friends noticed the difference immediately. Where their previous relationship had sometimes felt like William and Catherine against the world, this felt like a true partnership. They supported each other's individual interests while building a shared vision for their future. The biography reveals intimate moments from this period that showed two people who had learned from their mistakes and were determined not to repeat them. They talked about marriage openly, discussing not just when it might happen, but what kind of marriage they wanted to have. They planned for the challenges they would face as senior royals, while protecting the private life they had fought so hard to create. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to trust each other again. Catherine had to trust that William wouldn't run when things became difficult. William had to trust that Catherine's feelings for him weren't conditional on royal titles or public approval. The second chance they gave each other wasn't just about rekindling old feelings. It was about building something entirely new, stronger, and more mature than what they had shared in university. They were no longer the young couple who had fallen in love over coffee and study sessions. They were two adults who had chosen each other with full knowledge of what that choice would cost them. As 2010 dawned, their friends and family could see that something significant was building. William and Catherine seemed settled in a way they never had before, confident not just in their love for each other, but in their ability to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. The question was no longer whether they would marry, but when William would finally propose to the woman who had captured his heart, broken it, and then helped him put it back together again. The ring had belonged to his mother, and William carried it in his backpack for 3 weeks before finding the perfect moment to propose. It was October 2010, and they were on holiday in Kenya, staying in a remote cabin overlooking Lake Rutundu, with no photographers, no palace officials, and no one to witness what would become one of the most famous proposals in royal history, except the African wildlife. Catherine had no idea what William was planning. She thought they were simply enjoying a romantic getaway, a chance to escape the increasing speculation about their future that had been building throughout 2010. The media had begun calling her Waity Katie, a nickname that stung more than she let on, suggesting she was desperate for a proposal that might never come. But William had been planning this moment carefully. He had spoken to Catherine's father, Michael, during a formal dinner at the Middleton family home in Buckshire. The conversation, as revealed in the biography, was both traditional and deeply personal. "I'd like your permission to marry Catherine," William said, his usual confidence replaced by genuine nervousness. Michael's response was measured and protective. "Do you love her enough to make her happy for the rest of her life?" "I love her enough to try every single day," William replied. "Then you have my blessing," Michael said, "and my sympathy. You're getting quite a woman, but she deserves everything you can give her." The proposal itself happened during a morning walk around the lake. Catherine was photographing the sunrise when William dropped to one knee behind her, the sapphire and diamond ring catching the early African light. "Catherine Elizabeth Middleton," William said, his voice carrying across the still water, "will you marry me?" Catherine turned, saw William kneeling with the ring, and for a moment couldn't speak. The biography reveals that her first thought wasn't about becoming a princess or future queen, but about the young man she had fallen in love with at university finally being ready to build a life with her. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring, Princess Diana's engagement ring, fit perfectly. William had chosen it specifically because he wanted his mother to be part of this moment, and because he knew Catherine would understand the significance of wearing something that represented both love and loss. "It's beautiful," Catherine said, looking at the ring through her tears. "But are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back to being normal." "We were never normal," William laughed, pulling her into his arms. "But we can be extraordinary together." They kept the engagement secret for 3 weeks, telling only their immediate families and closest friends. The biography describes this period as one of pure joy for both of them, a time when they could savor their decision without the weight of public expectation. Catherine called her parents first, unable to contain her excitement despite the early hour in London. Carol Middleton cried when she heard the news, remembering the heartbroken young woman who had questioned whether love was worth the pain of royal life. "Are you happy?" Carol asked. "I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed," Catherine replied. "But yes, I'm happy. I'm so happy." William called his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had watched his relationship with Catherine with interest and growing approval. The Queen's response was characteristically direct. "It's about time. She's a sensible girl, and you're lucky to have her." When they announced the engagement publicly on November 16, 2010, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The official photographs showed a radiant Catherine wearing a sapphire blue dress that complemented Diana's ring, while William looked more relaxed and happy than the public had seen him in years. The engagement interview, conducted at St. James's Palace, gave the world its first real glimpse into their relationship as a couple preparing for marriage. Catherine spoke with a confidence and grace that silenced her critics, while William's protectiveness and pride were obvious to everyone watching. "She's got a real naughty sense of humor, which kind of helps me because I've got a very dry sense of humor," William said during the interview. "We're a good team together." Catherine's response was equally telling. "He's got a good sense of humor, and he looks after me very well in difficult situations." But the most revealing moment came when they were asked about the pressures Catherine would face as a member of the royal family. Her answer showed just how much thought she had given to her future role. "I'm willing to learn," she said simply. "And I hope that over time I'll be able to use this position to really help people." The biography reveals that behind the scenes, Catherine was already deep into preparation for royal life. She was taking lessons in everything from constitutional history to public speaking, learning about the charities and causes she would eventually champion, and studying the examples of successful royal women who had come before her. But she was also insisting on doing things her way. When palace officials suggested she needed a complete makeover, Catherine politely but firmly declined. When they recommended she distance herself from her middle-class background, she made it clear that her family was non-negotiable. She was willing to adapt to royal life, but she wouldn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. The wedding planning process revealed both the strengths of their partnership and the challenges they would face as a royal couple. Catherine wanted a relatively intimate ceremony, while protocol demanded a state occasion. William wanted to protect their privacy, while the government saw their wedding as an opportunity for national celebration. The compromise they reached reflected their approach to royal life itself. They would fulfill their public duties with grace and dignity, while protecting the private relationship that was the foundation of everything else. The wedding would be grand enough to satisfy constitutional requirements while personal enough to reflect their actual relationship. Catherine's transformation into a public figure during the engagement period was remarkable. The shy university student who had once hidden from photographers began conducting official engagements with natural ease. She visited charities, met with dignitaries, and handled media attention with the confidence of someone born to royal life. But the biography also reveals the private struggles she faced during this period. The pressure of constant scrutiny, the weight of representing the monarchy, and the knowledge that every decision she made would be analyzed and criticized took their toll. There were moments when she questioned whether she was strong enough for what lay ahead. "I feel like I'm living in a fishbowl," she confided to William during one particularly difficult week. "Everyone watches everything I do, everything I wear, everyone I talk to." William's response showed how much he had learned from their earlier struggles. "Then we'll make sure the fishbowl is as comfortable as possible." and will face it together. The wedding itself, on April 29, 2011, was watched by 2 billion people worldwide. But for William and Catherine, the most important moment wasn't the ceremony at Westminster Abbey, or the carriage procession, or the balcony kiss that delighted the crowds. It was the quiet moment they shared in the Abbey's vestry after signing the marriage register, when they finally had a chance to speak privately as husband and wife. "We did it," Catherine whispered, her voice filled with amazement. "We did," William agreed. And now the real work begins. The biography reveals that this moment of private connection in the midst of public spectacle would become a pattern in their marriage. They learned to find each other in crowds, to communicate with glances across formal dinner tables, and to protect their relationship even when surrounded by the machinery of monarchy. Their first years of marriage were not without challenges. Catherine faced criticism for her fashion choices, her public speaking, and her approach to royal duties. William struggled with balancing his military career with his royal obligations. They both had to adjust to life under constant scrutiny and the pressure of representing the crown. But they also discovered something that not all royal couples had found. They genuinely enjoyed working together. Catherine's natural empathy complemented William's more formal approach to official duties. His knowledge of royal protocol helped her navigate complex situations, while her fresh perspective helped him see familiar issues in new ways. The biography describes intimate moments from their early married life that showed two people who had grown into their roles without losing sight of what made them fall in love in the first place. They still laughed at each other's jokes, still challenged each other's opinions, and still found ways to be just William and Catherine, even when the world saw them as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. When they welcomed their first child, Prince George, in 2013, their transformation from royal couple to royal family was complete. Catherine's approach to motherhood, balancing public interest with private protection, reflected the same careful balance they had brought to their marriage. The woman who had once questioned whether she was strong enough for royal life had become one of the monarchy's greatest assets. The man who had once needed space to figure out what he wanted had become a devoted husband and father. Together, they had created something that seemed almost impossible in the modern royal family, a genuine partnership that served both their personal happiness and their public duty. Their love story, which began with a chance meeting over lukewarm coffee, had evolved into something much more significant. They had become proof that modern royalty could be both dutiful and authentic, that ancient institutions could adapt to contemporary values, and that true love really could survive even the most extraordinary circumstances. As they settled into their roles as senior members of the royal family, William and Catherine continued to write new chapters in their remarkable story. But the foundation remained the same. Two people who had chosen each other, lost each other, found each other again, and decided that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.